A lot of
asking the
grandstanding.
question.
Absolutely.
And here's my chance to get my 15 minutes of fame. This is a much more civilized and appropriate way of doing it.
I just want to also bring everyone's attention to the fact that over our shoulder here, we're actually seeing a live look at the room. So when things really start to get going there, we'll bring you back to those proceedings. But let's take a moment to reflect on the witnesses so far. Let's begin with Bill Taylor, acting ambassador to Ukraine, top diplomat. He was really been described as, at least by Democrats, as the narrator, the person who could tell the story, the star witness who was going to not only bring the quid pro quo element of all this to life, but also bring to life what this really meant, how this really affected Ukraine if in fact this aid was upheld. How do you think he's been performing as a witness?
For the most part, I'd give him a B,
okay.
Maybe a B+. You know?
Okay.
I thought that he did a very good job of explaining the why this is important. And up until now, I mean, you know, I'm more than a casual observer of all this.
Sure.
I never really thought it was too important, to be quite frank, until he actually put it in that people are dying, children are dying. The ramifications of withholding that military aid were enormous, right. And something that none of us as Americans can countenance. I mean, that is not who we are. And I thought he did a superb job with that. I thought he started to fail when he started to tell us about what President Trump's motives were. He doesn't know what President Trump's motives are. And, you know, it was kind of and it really wasn't his fault. It was the questioner.
Right.
You know, that was kind of an amateur move, I thought.
Yeah.
But for the most part, I think it's framed very well. I think we all know now, hey, this is not just politics as usual.
Right. Daniel Goldman is the attorney, the deputy attorney that Adam Schiff was having doing that questioning. And, you know, when we discuss a witness's credibility, I mean, one of the things that it's clear Democrats are trying to do is by pointing to these contemporaneous text messages, by pointing to the fact that drawing out the idea that he was a voracious note taker, they're trying to build up the credibility. But you feel like in some ways, perhaps his credibility is being taken away because he is projecting into what the motive of President Trump might have been. How much do you think that's really going to resonate with the people at home who are watching it?
I'm not sure, you know, because it hasn't all unfolded yet. But I think the Democrats should be really careful to recognize that every one of us, Democrat, Republican, every one of us are incredibly suspicious of their motives as to why are you doing this? That we got an election in November. And so I think you want to stay as close to the facts as you possibly can and let the American people decide. You know?
Right.
And you know, give us some credit. I mean, to think that we're incapable of deciding it and you got to tell us is just, I think it weakens your case. So
let's consider the other witness that we've been hearing from, George Kent, a senior State Department official. He was looked at as someone who could bring to life another aspect of the case, particularly with this sort of shadow diplomacy that's been unfolding with this back channel that was considered by many to be inappropriate with Rudy Giuliani and Ukraine. In general, do you think that he has spoken less? We've heard from him less, but how do you think he's performing?
So far, I think he's excellent, just superb, in that he doesn't let them pull him into what they want him to say. You know, he stays very close to the facts. That this is what's happening. This is what's going on in the back channel. This is what I saw. This is what I heard. And when he didn't, he says, I didn't. I think they picked their witnesses extremely well. I think they're telling us the story. And in the opening, that's all important.
One of the boldest statements he's made so far is his bow tie. You can't debate that. It's a good bow tie. It's a big statement. So, you know, as a trial attorney, I want to leverage your experience here a little bit. Or actually, you know, as a mayor, let's take it this way, right? You're thinking about the way Trump is governing, right? We're getting another peek into the way Trump is governing. Now, whether or not these are high crimes and misdemeanors, whether or not this meets the elements of a bribe is a conversation that perhaps we can have in a moment. But just in general, what you're seeing of the way President Trump is governing and what this might suggest about the way he's doing his job, what do you think?
Well, I think we've seen it from the inception. You know, the person that was most surprised he won was Trump. And I think that's pretty well been documented at this point. And so as a result, from the very beginning, he had a second and third string team behind him. And even though he's tried to fix that, he's been unsuccessful in fixing that. I mean, what is he doing letting Giuliani go over there and cut deals like that? You know, what he fundamentally lacks is experience. You know, I mean, he actually has done some things I think everybody would say was pretty good, and an improvement in some areas of what the country is experiencing. But his team is so disorganized, and people are afraid of him. They're afraid to join that team. People that are career government people, they don't want to get anywhere near, because it's short-lived, and you end up in situations where you might have to go to jail. And you know, until he is, you know, I thought he had it fixed when he hired the general to be his chief of staff. Right. But we saw what happened.
Well, and you and I were talking before, you know, while we were watching the testimony, and you were saying something to the effect of, essentially, as mayor, you do understand some aspects of the way he's governing. There's just one thing in particular that he did that you should never really do. Why don't you tell me about that?
Well, you don't do it yourself.
You know? And when you say that, what do you mean?
Well, what I mean is, let's be realistic. This stuff does go on, right? He never...
And that, by the way, is what Mick Mulvaney said publicly.
Right.
This stuff goes on.
Right, it does.
Okay.
But it goes on in a way like say a similar thing. I mean, say that I have this terrible enemy and I want something bad to happen to them.
Okay.
I would never tell somebody to do something bad to them. They either get the feeling or they don't get the feeling. And I mean that in a legal way. I don't, you know, I'm not talking about, you know, mafia type stuff. Right. But and the second thing you do is you never carry the message. You know, I mean, he's got Giuliani, for heaven's sakes. I mean, Giuliani is the one who goes and tells the Ukrainians, this is what Donald wants. You either do it or you don't. Right. Right. And but I've never even seen it get to that level. It's really, you convey what you know, this is your feeling, right? Right. And people will either dive into that and do it, or they won't.
Well, and I guess to your point, I mean, the Republicans would say, yeah, in fact, Trump, to them, President Trump hasn't, in fact, made that immediate connection, and they're going to say the witnesses you were saying, these have been well-chosen witnesses. The Republicans are going to say, we will hear Devin Nunes say, these witnesses don't have any first-hand knowledge, so therefore they don't have credibility. This is all hearsay. The person who may have some first-hand knowledge is someone who may be coming next, testifying on Wednesday. And then, of course, if Mick Mulvaney and John Bolton come down, those are other witnesses as well. When you look ahead to the Republican strategy that's forthcoming, and obviously we're going to see that line of questioning, but what do you expect them to say?
This case is going to rise or fall with Bolton. You know, he's the one with the most credibility. He's the one who got out of it when he didn't like what he saw happening. He's a career State Department person. You cannot question his patriotism and his love of this country. You might question the way he deals with that, and the way, you know, that a lot of people think that he's much too aggressive. All of those things are open to question, but not his motives and not his love of this country. And the thing that the one thing that I've heard today that gives me pause is that he backed out because of this. This is why he's no longer where he was. That's significant to me. I think we're gonna. I think that's good theater. They've got some great surprises coming. Yeah. But it will rise and fall on what he says.
Well, it'll be interesting too, because I think you know, from what we've heard, Washington Post reported that sources close to Bolton have said he's willing to testify if he can get a court to clear the way for him to do so. And this is also coinciding with the fact that he signed a multi-million-dollar book deal, and it would probably be some pretty good press and probably pretty good for book sales if he had an opportunity to get up there and share his side.
But I think it's totally appropriate to sign a book deal. I don't see anything wrong with that at all once you leave government. In fact, we want people to sign book deals because we want transparency. We want to know what happened. But he's playing this extremely well in that he's letting nothing happen to tarnish his credibility. If the argument is made that the president can stop him from testifying, let the courts decide. I mean, that really is the appropriate response in that situation, so that by the time he gets there, and I have no doubt he's going to get there, you know, it's going to be interesting what we hear.
So one of the possible lines of approach here for the Democrats is to basically prove that this is in some way a high crime or misdemeanor, or one of the very few crimes that are specifically enumerated by the impeachment clause in the Constitution, which is bribery or treason. So let's take bribery as the possibility here, and the idea of quid pro quo kind of relating to that. Of course, bribery has technical elements, but when you see what the Democrats are putting on so far, and what we're hearing so far, and we're looking at these texts and this back and forth of aid being upheld and do me a favor, do you think that the elements of bribery on any level are being satisfied?
I certainly hope not.
And when you say certainly hope not, because...
How many times have you asked somebody to do a favor, right?
Yeah, I try and limit that, just
sure.
because.
Actually, it's a way to bond, you know.
That's true.
If somebody does a short, you know, you ask them for something that's going to take 5 minutes, right? Now they're invested in you.
Right. It's true. And then you get an opportunity to express gratitude, and that's a nice thing.
Right. Yeah. I don't see bribery yet. Does it rise to a solicitation of a bribe? I don't see it yet. You know, and I think that's the fundamental failing of this whole proceeding. Don't wrap it around a statute that you can't meet the burden of. You know,
right?
And if they thought they could, they would lead with that.
Right.
You know, it is a crime to do da 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 da.
Right.
He committed that crime when he did this, this, and this, and this is why it's important.
Right.
You know, they got the why down, but I think that, you know, you don't build your house on sand. And so far, I think that may be what they did.
Well, there's going to be a lot of conversation around this bribery idea, and it's interesting to think about, because when the Founding Fathers put bribery in the Constitution, in this clause, there wasn't any federal statute. They were considering a broader conception of bribery, one that was essentially saying power for sale. Essential on some level, right? And so in that sense, if you're being originalist and a founding, you know, trying to get into the mind of the Founding Fathers, then perhaps in some way it has been met. And of course, the statutory definition of bribery, as you've been saying, has been evolving, right, over the course of the last 100 years in courts.
And all of those arguments might be great if we had real jurists looking at this.
Right, but you have you're looking at the public.
We don't. It's the all of this is can they convince the American public, because we all know what the result's going to be. He is not going to leave office because of these proceedings, because they don't have the votes. And you got to remember how this is working. It is, you got the DNC and the RNC, and they both control the money for these guys to get reelected. And what we can talk about that not being important, and we all know it is. How would you like to be standing in front of a judge that has been bribed? You know? In 35 years, I've never had that experience. I've been in front of some pretty terrible judges who were as biased as you could imagine, and that was a horrible experience. But to actually stand in front of one who, there's this potload of money, as long as he stays in line. Right? And that's what's happening with both. All the Democrats are going to vote for it that are up for re-election. All the Republicans will vote against it. Sure. Unless there's something really horrible.
Well, and
that hasn't happened
And
yet.
that's an interesting point, right? Because if we look at, there's such little analogous precedent for these circumstances. So we look back to the Nixon impeachment, we look back to the Clinton impeachment, and one of the more famous sorts of lines that are coming out of this retrospective analysis of the Nixon impeachment was that when the impeachment proceedings began, public support for removing or impeaching President Nixon was somewhere in the 20s, 26%, I believe. Right. And then by the time that we were fully in the impeachment, the Judiciary Committee recommended articles of impeachment to the House, it was above 60%. So there is perhaps this idea, to your point, that if they make the case to the American people, that will shift, and perhaps some of those Senate Republicans will also change their sides and their votes.
I can certainly see why they have every reason to believe that might happen. I mean, you know, Nixon would never have been impeached if he had just sat in his chair and said nothing.
Sure.
And did nothing.
And never got on the phone calls, and never had transcript of his phone calls.
He didn't break into the DNC. He didn't tell anybody to break in.
This is to your earlier point, really. Don't be the one who's saying this stuff.
Right. Yeah. The problem is Trump can't put his iPhone down.
Yeah. Well, we have seen
that. He's texting constantly. Yeah. If he would quit, if we'd put Twitter aside, he might pull this off.
I'm looking over my shoulder only because it looks like we might be getting ready to come back. So you and I will continue talking while they figure that out. But please continue.
both of the Clinton and the Nixon impeachments, what happened? They lied. Now, this is really fascinating because this president, we're okay if he lies. He lies every week. I mean, let's be honest about it. I mean, everybody knows that. So is that going to have the same reaction? Probably not. I think we're immune to it. I think we're so jaded by it that it really doesn't matter what he does. And so I don't know that they get there.
It's interesting stuff to consider. I mean, we're watching